Welcome to the Content Amplified podcast, brought to you by Masset. Our goal is to help you get more from your marketing content. Each episode is a 10 to 15 minute interview with industry experts that share amazing insights to help you squeeze as much juice from your content as you possibly can. Here's today's interview.
Welcome back to another episode of Content Amplified. Today I'm joined by Shiro. Shiro, welcome to the show.
It's great to be here, Ben. Thank you.
You bet. Well, I'm really excited about the subject today, and it's really relevant to your background. Shiro, do you mind sharing a little bit more about yourself, a little bit of your background, and really what you love about marketing?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I've been in marketing for just around a decade. And, I think one thing that makes me unique or that I specialize in is really figuring out where people's watering holes are or communities are and understand like what people really care about that you sell into. And so I've been in B2B SaaS for 6 years now. I was in e-commerce before that. But I think, one thing that doesn't change across all those industries is you got to find the communities where your people are at.
Very cool. Well, one thing that we're going to talk about today that I'm really excited about, and Shiro is really passionate about this and has planted his flag right here on this subject, is every B2B organization should have a podcast. Shiro, why do you think that that's the case and everyone should have a podcast?
Yes, absolutely. I totally believe every B2B company should start a podcast. And I specify B2B because that's the space I work in today. And I think a lot of B2B is also hesitant towards, non-traditional marketing. So that's where I take the stance that, yes, I believe every B2B SaaS company should start their own podcast.
I love it. Well, how should they actually go about doing this? Why should they do this? What does it how does it make a difference?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll start with the why, and then we can kind of jump into, just some high level how-tos later on. But I kind of have a couple pillars of why you should get started, right? First of all, if you are doing B2B marketing, you should always be thinking about how you're going to add value to your communities that you serve or your personas, ICPs, what have you. But yeah, I think a podcast is a really great way to do that. Just like we're talking about here, Ben, creating content that's going to add value to the community. So specific for me, I started a higher ed podcast to talk to people that we sell to also, but also their communities. And through interviews, we figure out, whether it's things they've learned, struggles they've ran across, or things that are working for them. We can share all that knowledge to the community, and I think it's been very impactful. Another one is it's kind of related to the first pillar, but as a podcast host or co-host, right? When you start a podcast, it helps you get connected to the influencers or thought leaders in your industry, right? It's very, very hard to approach those people otherwise if you don't have something to invite them to or to add value to. And so it's a great way to connect with those influencers and thought leaders in the communities that you serve.
I love it. I love it. And it makes a lot of sense. How can you serve and provide value to a community that you don't know? And it's one of the greatest ways to connect, build relationships, provide value. And in today's world of, automated emails, I get so many spam emails and things like that where people don't really care about the relationship. They care about the sale. This kind of spits in the face of that and is like, no, I'm going to build a relationship with someone first. That's more important to me.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think one reason, everyone wants to start a podcast, from a business perspective is, okay, we're going to, increase awareness. We're going to increase reach, right, of our brand. And one thing I wasn't really thinking about was those two things or the second thing, especially about connecting with leaders in the industry. I didn't understand how much value this actually had. Because when it comes down to other marketing functions, right, or channels, I don't just do the podcast, right? I helped create case studies. I help write white papers, research articles, right, or blog posts. There's so much content that we're responsible for publishing and executing on. And when you have a network of thought leaders who are in the weeds day to day of the work that you want to talk about, you have a huge list of people you can say, hey, Fred, what are your thoughts on this? Hey, Mark, what's going on in the industry right now? What are some hot topics? it's a community involvement of creating these relationships with people that you can really pick brains from and create better content without having to like go to ChatGPT and say like, hey, what's hot in higher ed right now, right? You get the actual personalized information coming in. So it's been immensely helpful on a front that I wasn't expecting.
That's cool. That's really cool. That's a huge benefit. So shifting gears, let's move to the how side of things. We talked about the why. Let's move to the how. How should we start running a podcast? How does it benefit the business? How do we get moving forward on a podcast for a B2B business?
Absolutely. I would, first start with figuring out what type of show you want to have. So, what do you want to talk about? Do you have your niche or niche locked in, right, of audience? And the last part I would say is, I wouldn't really worry too much about creating something extremely produced or produced overly, I would say, because, we're a small company, right? So I guess it depends on, how big your company size is, but I wouldn't really worry too much about the details. I think the most important part is nailing down your audience, right? And recording those first 7 episodes, because there's a statistic out there that I think only 80% of podcasts make it past episode 7. And so, making a commitment to 10 episodes and making a commitment to nailing down a similar audience for each episode is where I would start.
I love that. I love that. So one of the biggest kind of terms that everyone looks at, it's a buzzword, is account-based marketing, ABM.
Mm-hmm.
How does a podcast kind of help in that motion?
Definitely, yes. So this is something I've recently added within our own podcast here, but talk to your sales teams, right? Most sales teams have an account list that they're going after. And so we share that list, and I use that list to figure out people that work at those companies or accounts that I could have on my show and would be beneficial for everyone. And what that helps is it creates a relationship from a marketing side with that account, someone on that account. And you can start some conversations around just getting to know each other, right? Telling them what you do. If your podcast does interview senior level folks, then more than often not, you can, tell them more about your brand, ask for a connection or a referral within the company that maybe your account executive is trying to reach out to, right? And helps build that rapport. A great example of this is yesterday I got done with a podcast episode with one of our current customers, and then we knew that, they could make use of maybe one or two other of our solutions. And so I just asked him, hey, if you ever need this solution or another solution to help with your needs, just let me know, right? Keep the doors open, but I'm not doing a hard sell. And he responded and said, hey, we're actually under contract for another year for this solution, but we're having issues. So I'm going to reach back out in 8 months, and boom, I've created a connection, right? I can now introduce that person to someone from our sales team. And we can work hand in hand on this ABM approach using a podcast.
I love that. And again, I think that in this day and age where people, they are overly sold to, I think that there's a really big point here that it is about the relationship first. Relationships build opportunities. And, in a business where maybe you have a bigger ACV, things of that nature, the relationship can go really far. And it is a little bit longer of a play. But when you're in like a really, B2B business, but your ACV is really low, things of that nature, it may not be the right play. So obviously everyone has to kind of take it into account. What have you found to be really good? So you know why you're doing the podcast, you're working with sales, you've got target accounts, you're working with them. What about the distribution, right? You've got some really good content now. What do you do with it? Like, how do you actually get value out of it besides the relationship? How are you taking advantage of it?
Absolutely. It's interesting that we're talking about this last, because I feel like it should be the first reason why everyone starts a podcast is because you get content out of it, right? But I wanted to talk about the things that I wasn't expecting, the outcomes and usefulness of the podcast that I wasn't expecting first. But yeah, it all comes down to content. That's why you start a podcast, right? The podcast for us has been immense in terms of, the amount of content we're able to create. In terms of distribution, right? I will say, like, our podcast doesn't get that many downloads on the actual podcast platforms, right? Spotify, Apple, Google now as well, right? we don't get too many downloads on those. But what we do with each episode, we do record video. So we'll create a video micro clip of maybe 1 to 3 key points that our guests have on the show. And then I'll create a LinkedIn post with it. Make sure to add captions, guys, with captions overlaid. And then I'll post it on my LinkedIn network. I'll tag the guest. I'll maybe tag some people that I've had prior on the show that are related to the topic to ask their opinion about it. And each post gets so many more impressions than it does on the actual podcast platforms from a downloads or plays perspective. I've had posts on LinkedIn get over 20,000 impressions just completely organically using a micro clip from the episode. And what your company can do also is you can take those clips and add them into your social calendar as well and post them as a company. There's just so much more you can do. I share really good clips with my sales teams as well. And so I'll say, hey, Lauren, like this micro clip content's a really good asset for this persona. You can share it out if you'd like to. And now that gives our salespeople a reason to reach out. They can just be like, hey, like, I don't want to bug you about, where our deal is, but like, here's this content asset. It made me think of you. I just wanted to share it with you. Right. So there's just so much more you can do. Some things we're not even utilizing yet is pulling quotes from it and creating carousel posts on LinkedIn, doing more with YouTube Shorts. There's just so much you can do with the long form content of a podcast and break it down into these bite-sized chunks.
I love it. That's such good advice. And I love that you hit on the fact that like sales reps can use this content to reach out, because one of the best sales reps I've ever known, he's a sales leader. He said, hey, in sales, you should never reach out without adding value, right? It should always provide some kind of value. Same with marketing. You should never have a touch point without value. And it's just an opportunity to say, hey, cool, this is someone you may know or respect that's in your space. Here's some cool thoughts they had. Like, I just thought this clip would be fun. All of a sudden they're like, cool, like this is a different kind of an email. I like this. Like, yeah, I can respect this. Really on the technical side, any recommendations for how to edit these clips? I know some people do it manually, AI tools. How do you do it in-house? What are your recommendations on that side of things?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess I'll give our editing agency a quick shout out. So I record each episode on Riverside, which is what we're using here today. That creates a very nice like library of all your post podcast episodes. And then I give my agency, so Elvira Media. So Mateo Elvira is the founder. He reached out to me and I was very interested in their services. But basically, I just give him access to my Riverside account and their editing team downloads the clips, creates all the micro clips of content, and then puts it out in a Notion table that's very easily digestible with some copy already in place. So I don't have to start from scratch on each episode. And, that makes the production side and the distribution side so much easier because I can now focus in on just the podcast recordings. And then the distribution is 80% there for me when I'm done with an episode.
And I love this. This could be a whole nother episode. The idea of picking strategic points to outsource so you can focus on the things that only you can do. Like you can only, you're the internal resource. You're the expert. You can host the podcast. You can do the outreach, but everything else can be potentially outsourced. So you can focus on building more relationships and things like that. So I think that's a golden opportunity, something to really consider. A quick, just for me, Riverside built into the software, you can do magic clips and AI will try to figure it out. And there is some other AI stuff, but don't be nervous about, the 1 to 2 minute clips. Like there are solutions that are effective and cheap that can absolutely take your content, turn it into clips, make it noteworthy. You don't have to have a crazy in-house editing team just to make that happen. So there's a lot of cool resources.
Yeah, I'll give a couple tools out there too. I think Cast Magic is another really cool one. It'll transcribe everything for you. It's all AI driven. So you literally just have to connect the RSS feed of your podcast to it and it'll create all these different pieces of content for you if you're working on a lower budget. And then boom, your spend is almost zero for post-production in terms of like creating content bits from it. So really recommend that. Yeah, there's just so many tools out there. If you're getting started, like, my advice is just just record those first 7 episodes because you have to get over the hump. And honestly, don't worry about all like the distributions and the micro clips. Like try to have real conversations like we're doing with your guests, right? And ask questions, right? Be intuitive, make it a conversation, not just one way, and record those first 7 episodes and then worry about the distribution and the editing and stuff. Cause like those are all things you don't need to worry about until you get your actual recordings in place.
Yeah.
Also, one thing was like, I was always stressed on how our content was doing, right? Like, oh, like, man, our plays just like aren't even close to what true crime podcasts are doing or Joe Rogan's doing. And I'm like, man, but at the end of the day, if I've connected with one person in the industry that's, outspoken and I have this relationship with them now, that's a win, right? And if a few people watch it, that's even a bigger win. And so I'm kind of trying to take these smaller wins into account because that's the reality, right? Like you got to take these small wins because that's what helps push the next episode forward.
I love it. And I think those points are really valuable when you're getting buy-in from the rest of the company, is to explicitly say, hey, this is an ABM motion. This is to build trust. This is relationship building. And there's content. If we happen to get views, that's great. But to your point, this is not going to be Joe Rogan numbers. Like CEO, heads up, like that's not the purpose of this. And let's be realistic about what we can do. That will set you up for success because there are people in your organization, especially not in marketing, who are going to be familiar with podcasts and they're going to think millions of downloads. They're going to associate certain things, and setting proper expectations, I think will help you get way further in your podcast efforts and the buy-in on the internal side of things.
Couldn't agree more. Yep.
Love it. All right. Well, Shiro, we have run out of time, unfortunately. Again, there's like 2 other podcast episodes of things that I would love to talk about, but we'll have to save those hopefully for another day. If anyone wants to connect online and really further the conversation, learn more about you, see how you're, posting on LinkedIn and things like that, how can they connect with you?
Yeah, absolutely. If you want to check out the podcast that I host and started on the behalf of the company Concept 3D, it's called Higher Ed Demand Gen. It's got like a big green logo, so yeah, it's hard to miss it. And then if you want to connect with me on LinkedIn, I'm super active. I check my inbox there multiple times a day. Just search Shiro Hattori. It's ShiroHatori, and you should be able to find me.
Love it. Again, thank you so much for your insights and your time today.
Thanks, Ben. I love talking about this, so appreciate you having me on the show.
Thank you for listening to the Content Amplified podcast. Please subscribe and leave us a review. And for additional ways to get more out of your content, visit our website at getmasset.com. That's getmasset.com. And tune in next time to the Content Amplified podcast.